Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm just going to run through some really quick housekeeping. My name is Laura Tans and I'm the organiser here at NAHT Cymru, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to this webinar, A Failure to Invest, the State of Welsh School Funding in 2021. I am pleased to confirm that this event is being simultaneously translated into Welsh, so if you'd like to listen in Welsh, then please click on the Welsh option at the bottom of your screens. We are recording this evening's broadcast and this will be available on our website within the next day or so. During this evening's webinar, there will be an opportunity for you to speak, and if you would like to address the meeting, then please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of your screen, or alternatively, please use the chat function and comments can be read out on your behalf. We appreciate you sharing and commenting on our events on social media, and we are very active on Twitter and Facebook, so please use the hashtag #FundOurChildren'sFuture if posting. We would like to request that if posting photos of our digital broadcast that you are mindful not to include comments from others which appear in the chat function, and we thank you in advance for your understanding. I now have the pleasure of handing the meeting over to our Director at NAHT, Laura Dole, to undertake our webinar introductions. Laura.
Thanks very much, Laura, and good evening to everyone. And we truly welcome your support in attending the launch this evening of our report, A Failure to Invest, the State of Welsh School Funding in 2021. So as you know, school funding is at the forefront of NAHT's campaign agenda. Here in Wales, it has been the cornerstone of our 2021 Senedd election manifesto and is one of the 5 core priorities which forms the basis of our campaign and lobbying activity. In October 2020, a report into school funding was published by Welsh Government. The findings, compiled by leading academic Luke Sibieta, told the government what the profession already knew to be the case. The school funding system was broken, there was not enough money, and the money that was available was not being distributed fairly. A year later, we are still waiting for the government to update us on their plan on what they're going to do with those findings that state clearly school funding is in urgent need of review. In a bid to lobby the government, we have taken matters into our own hands, and we have compiled our own report based on evidence provided by our members from across the nation. This report shines a light on the chronic underfunding of our schools. The findings are not as a result of the pandemic, and this is not an issue that has only just reared its head. This is a problem that spans many Welsh Government administrations and has never truly been addressed. So, what does the report say? It shows that schools are being forced to cut expenditure in an attempt to balance budgets. Schools are doing this by reducing staff through not replacing vacancies, reducing investment in equipment for schools, delaying repairs or refurbishment, reducing maintenance budgets, and reducing investment in teacher training. 69% of respondents to our survey said that providing increased support for pupils with additional learning needs is putting an enormous pressure on their budgets, with 41% of respondents stating that providing increased support for learners with mental health also accounts for a significant additional financial strain. Almost all school leaders reported that funding for pupils with ALN in their schools are insufficient, with 94% reporting that ALN funding they received is not sufficient enough to meet the needs of the new ALN legislation. A third, around 33%, said that they had to fund the purchase of additional support because they were not available or unable to access additional support from health and social services. More than 3/4 of school leaders said they do not have sufficient capital to maintain their school buildings. Nearly 1 in 5 school leaders surveyed predicted a deficit budget in 2021-22 based on current funding levels, with 16% of school leaders reporting that they need to make cuts to balance their budgets in this financial year. A total of 69% of school leaders said that the cuts they were being forced to make will have a negative impact on the quality of the provision provided at their school. These findings clearly tell us that in Wales we are in urgent need of sustained increase in school funding to ensure that pupil needs are met. The new curriculum for Wales and the additional learning needs reform have highlighted the need for substantially improved investment to support these significant changes in educational practice. Funds must be distributed in a direct and equitable way, unlike the present bureaucratic formula that we currently have. In this report, we set out our recommendation for government. These recommendations include an urgent and substantial increase in required budgets. The money delegated to schools via local government is not ring-fenced. It is not distributed it is currently distributed by multiple formulas, and that varies across different local authority areas, adding complications to an already inequitable system. Simply redistributing existing budgets in different ways will not solve the funding crisis. We're calling for a review of education spending across the country and need to ensure that the money that we do spend offers the best outcome for learners. We are calling for a review of how schools are funded, in line with the recommendations of the 2020 Review of School Spending in Wales, the Luke Sibieta report. That review must include the role and value of the middle tier. Government must immediately recognise and address the crisis in ALN funding. The long-awaited ALN reform provides an ideal opportunity to do and should not be delayed any further. The solution lies in a truly needs-met-led approach. Schools should not be left to work in isolation. We're calling for the Welsh Government to make substantial and sustained increases to fully fund health, local authority, social care and therapeutic services which pupils and schools rely on. Every political party across Wales put education at the top of its campaign agenda at the last Welsh Parliament elections. But what are those elected officials doing to fix our broken system that is clearly failing our learners? I'm now going to pass over to our NAHT Cymru President, Karina Hansen, who's going to share her thoughts and reflections on the report before inviting colleagues on the call to share their own perspective on the issues school funding has on their schools. Over to you, Karina.
Thank you and welcome everybody. This is our chance really to put across our concerns, our views, our wants to Welsh Government. It's been recorded, so we're going to be sending this off to anyone and everyone that will listen to us. I'm just going to put a little plea out there that you sign that the letter that we've sent out today as well, to send your letters to your ministers, just to highlight where we're coming from in terms of bringing education funding to the forefront. So it's a really complex issue. Obviously, it's bigger than just putting a little bit of money into schools. We really need, as we've explained, a substantial relook at the way schools are funded. And we've talked quite a lot today to some different people about that, about the thoughts that we've got, that you've seen highlighted in our report. So this is our opportunity to really to highlight the reality of what's going on in our schools day to day, and those stories need to come from us, the school leaders, because the truth is what it's like in schools at the moment. There isn't enough funding to function, let alone implement the enormous reform agenda that we've got in Wales at this time. So we've got some huge asks going on in education at the moment, not just the reform of our curriculum and assessment and progression going on, but we've also got our ALN reform, which we've talked about there, and the recovery plans that we've been given. So it's a massive amount of work, and none of these things are going to go well if we're not funded adequately. Reality is that lots of schools don't have enough funding, for example, to put a teacher in their nursery classes. Reality is that school leaders are covering multiple other roles in their schools at the moment: caretaking, admin, cleaning, simply because they can't afford the hours or can't pay the posts at a competitive rate. We're hearing a lot of that coming through NAHT. Reality is we're making really difficult decisions around which children we can support with their learning and their mental health moving forward. Reality is, as we've just highlighted, there remains a huge disparity in terms of funding across Wales per pupil. So, you know, that doesn't feel like a fair way to be funding our children across Wales. We're hearing a huge amount of concern around ALN at the moment. I think that's probably one of the biggest areas, because that reality is hitting us now, and just a sense of confusion, a sense of worry, about how ALN is going to be funded and how on earth it is that we're going to put what has become legislation into place. We've highlighted our concerns around this, that Welsh government have legislated but not really thought about the implications of the cost. We've been told time and time again that it's a cost neutral transformation. Well, we know it's not. There has been a piece of work done from a local authority that's demonstrating that primary schools themselves are going to have to invest somewhere in the region of £50,000 to £100,000 a year ongoing in being able to work the implementation and keep that going. Secondary schools, the figure is around about £100,000 to £150,000 per year. Now that in reality is an enormous amount of money across Wales, and I think the figures that they worked up, taking into account the figures that the local authority would need, came to something like 100 to 200 million in Wales just to put the ALN bill in place. So we're not talking small amounts of investment in education, we're talking a major consideration of what schools need. And we all know that what we're going to be told is that there's not a very big piece of cake to be divided out from Westminster. But the reality is we've got this enormous job in front of us. And, you know, we've started the journey. Welsh Government started that journey, and we've really got to see the journey through to the end. Okay, so I don't really want to be the one that does all the talking, because this is the opportunity that we've got to explain to our ministers what the reality is like, what we're dealing with as school leaders, and express our concerns. And I really want to hear your voices that we can take and send this recording to, so that we're all being heard and get our views across. So I can see I've got a hand up already. Tim, if you'd like to come in first, please.
Right. Thanks, Karina. I think there's a four-pronged issue about funding of education in Wales. I mean, we know historically it hasn't had as much funding, for example, as in England. We also know, sorry, there was no video on that first bit. We also know that COVID has added extra expenditure, and we've had a branch meeting recently, and members are really concerned about what they're going to do post-March if the additional funding for COVID ends. We've also got two other pressures at the moment, which everybody knows about, and that's the implementation of the new curriculum, which has got incredible costs in terms of staff training, which aren't being covered by the money that has been offered. And finally, another very big drain on resources, adding to the complex pressures already there, is the LNET bill and the funding of special needs. This is moving an incredible cost onto schools in terms of staff time to operate the process. So there's four things there which are all putting considerable strain on schools. Thanks.
Thanks, Tim. And you know, to be reassured that all of those points are things that we're highlighting with Welsh Government, and certainly take your point around ALN, just some of the issues that we've got there in terms of time. When that piece of work I was talking about, looking at the £50,000 to £100,000 for a primary school, that was taking into account the time that ALNCOs might need to carry out all of the roles that they've got that have already been put into legislation, but the cost implication hasn't been considered in terms of what that means to schools. So thank you for highlighting that. I thought I saw another hand up. Is it Vicky? Oh, I've got Dean waving at me. I'll bring in Dean, and then if you can raise your hand, anyone else? Great. Thanks, Dean.
Hi there. Yeah, Tim makes very valid points on the pressures in terms of school budgets. I think historically, we've been having this discussion ever since I've been involved in NHT and been a head teacher. And every year we come with the same very clear message that schools in Wales are not funded sufficiently to deliver the basic core curriculum. And then whatever political persuasion comes along in terms of government and the momentum towards the curriculum or the momentum towards the ALN bill or whatever policy is at the forefront of that political persuasion, we still have a very simple answer, because we know as professionals on the ground, we are frustrated because we cannot deliver our core purpose because our schools are not funded enough. We know that across Wales, there are so many differentials in the way in which budget formulas are worked out and the way in which AWPU levels differ across Wales as well, and between key stages as well, historically. We continue to have these arguments. Now, the review that's been carried out by looks of it looks at all of these things and makes very clear recommendations. But my point is quite a simple one. That review would have cost a lot of money to say the same things that we would have said to government as lead professionals on the ground. Why does it always take a professor or somebody else to tell them the honest message that school leaders are saying on the ground? So we need to be, I think, a bit more vocal going forward now that we've had enough, that we've given you this message. You want us to deliver on key programmes for Welsh Government, so we need to start laying the facts on the ground. We need to ask Welsh Government to look at what they're spending all their money on, whether or not enough is coming to education. When it does come to education, where does it go? We have a very complicated middle tier structure in Wales. I wonder how much that costs and how much of that could come straight to the front line. We have grant structures in Wales that have been a response to the political whims of various leaders over many, many years in various parties. Some of that needs to be stripped back. Fund our schools properly at its core. Ensure that wherever we are in Wales, there's equal distribution of funds, and every chance, whether they're for a child is in Wrexham or whether they're in Bangor or Cardiff or Swansea, they all have the same opportunities, and that includes those children as well with ALN. So I think we've got all the data. We've had it for so many years. We now need to lay it on the front of them. You've had your review. You've got your professors and your researchers in. Now, what are you going to do? Because we can only deliver when we're funded properly.
Thanks, Dean. Thank you. Excellent points there. Thank you. I've got Louise.
Hello, can everyone hear me and see me?
Yes, we can. Thanks, Louise.
Hello. Yeah, I just wanted to add to the points that my colleagues are making, really. I don't want to reiterate them, but with regards to the new ALN code and the universal provision, the necessary aspects of that are going to require an LSA being in every classroom, because obviously we can't conduct universal provision for ALN pupils if we don't have the provision in the classroom. And obviously if we're not funded correctly for that and appropriately for that, then the whole system falls down before it begins, and we can't move into a different type of intervention. So that is the crux of the universal provision, ILPs, IDPs, everything that's being mentioned, and our training that we receive in regards to that. But similarly, we have got, and I know Dean has alluded to, as has Tim, the third tier. We've got third tier, every authority, and within ours, particularly after having stated that we wish to go more of a self-evaluation approach to save some money and put money elsewhere, we have now been informed that there are 3 new ESSA posts being advertised, which again are going to take £180,000 plus out of the money that's going to be assigned to us as schools. And there's also been 3 additional roles created within our ALN sessions, ALN team. And these are the team that are obviously not in schools. So we're identifying 5, possibly 6 individuals here who are going to be on salaries of 50,000 plus and are not going to set foot inside a school, are going to be working in administrative offices, while the rest of us are obviously on the coalface trying to deal with the fact that we haven't got enough money. It isn't sustainable. It's very demoralising for staff and leaders. I know that we're in a position whereby we're in whatever the situation, and we're exposed and we are vulnerable, and it isn't comforting to know that we are not valued because the appropriate funding isn't being given to us.
Thanks, Louise. Really valid points there, and I'm just going to pick up on the two that you've made there. Firstly, the middle tier point. This is something we've raised earlier on today. I think that is something we've talked about, the fact that NAHT feels that it needs to be reviewed. There's no accountability system in place for that middle tier since it was introduced in 2014. Nobody really knows what the value for money is. Nobody knows whether they're doing a good job. There's certainly not equity across Wales in terms of what the offer is from the
and has anybody had
consortia.
an impact report or an impact statement from any of the middle tiers? Because we certainly haven't in Carmarthenshire. I open that up to the forum really. Has anybody had an impact statement from their middle tiers? Because I can't confirm one.
No, and that's exactly the point we've raised today. We've said, we want to see NAHT calling now for a review of the middle tier. We think it's about time that happened, that there was a value for money exercise done around that, because our question has been, is that money better spent putting teachers in front of children?
Yes.
And that is the key question, because if the impact is not such that, with what we've got a huge amount of, you've just raised there, we've got our consortia, we've got our local authorities, there's too much money being spent up here, but not enough going directly to schools. And the other point we've raised, particularly around the reform agenda, we've gone beyond that point now, where we're going out and expecting training to come and research to be done and all of those sort of things. It's schools now. The agenda is on our doorstep. It's no longer somewhere up there, it's here, and we are the people that need the money. We've made that point really, really clearly today. And then the other point you've put there, it's quite interesting what you've just said there about ALN and the universal provision and having an LSA in every class. Now, I wonder whether that picture is the same one being drawn across Wales, because that's certainly not the message that we're getting in Swansea. And if you're in Carmarthenshire and we're in Swansea, well, our message around universal provision is not an LSA doing it, it's the class teacher. So there is no intention in our local authority that universal provision is going to be supported by an LSA. So
not necessarily just the LSA, Karina, but obviously having two members of staff in the classroom to facilitate the learning, because obviously, within the needs of those children that are more, enabled to access everything. So wave 3 intervention, but in the classroom.
Indeed. Okay, so the different messages again, and this is always the problem we have in Wales, is that we get such different interpretations that we then end up with this disparity that happens because different local authorities and different consortia read things in a different way, and therefore funding gets allocated in a different way, and children across Wales are getting a different offer. And that doesn't seem to be a fair approach.
You mentioned funding, Karina. Do you have, as Swansea had, because you're a stone's throw away from us, has Swansea, and there's obviously many colleagues here tonight, is there any, we are still waiting for the representation through the budget forum, which hasn't happened as yet for the autumn term, to establish the formula for funding.
Nope.
And you haven't had it in Swansea, either of you.
And I think what's happening when we keep asking that question at our local authority level, the answer seems to be, well, we're waiting to see, and everybody's waiting for everybody else to make a decision, because nobody actually knows how they're going to address that very problem, because ALN is a beast that has been released onto schools, really, isn't it, without any thought about how that is going to impact on schools and provision. And I find it really concerning, because in the particularly the funding launch that we went to, the England funding launch, and some of the stories coming from England around ALN or their send are heartbreaking, because they are ahead of us in this way of working. And there were stories there about schools turning away children. I know we're not allowed to, but that's the reality, because they're talking to parents and saying, I can't offer you anything. Like, this is what we can do, and it's not enough for the children. There was a story from one particular school, which I found really moving, where the head teacher and all the teachers in that school have gone down to a 4-day week, so that they could keep their teaching assistants to support the needs in their school. Wow. That's reality. And that is my greatest concern about what we're going to see happening in Wales, because the ALN agenda is so huge, the impact is going to be so big, that we are really going to be sitting there going, okay, so what do we do? Are we going to ask our teachers to work a 4-day week so we can keep our teaching assistants, so that we can keep our children in our school communities? It's a real worry.
And we're all waiting before we do our provision mapping and obviously update it, because, you know, how many of us are going to assign pupils for having IDPs if we're not going to be funded appropriately for them? And the pupils will miss out, because, you know, speaking from my school in particular, and I promised Dean I'm going to stop talking after this, so you can fill us in on Newport. My school in particular, we've got 46% ALN pupils, and there are significant needs amongst many of those children. Currently, we have 4 statemented pupils, but, you know, it does beg to ask the question. At the moment, we're only being funded 50%. That's going to be reduced again. But, you know, why are we going to go for IDPs if we're not going to receive funding for them? You know, I'll get off my soapbox. Thank you very much.
We're all feeling exactly what you feel, Louise. It's like exactly that sort of message that we need to be sending to Welsh Government and our concerns, because, you know, this is happening now, and ALN funding particularly needs to be looked at as a matter of urgency. So thanks for that. It's really important we get those views across. So I don't know if anyone else has got anything they want to share with us. It'd be nice to get some more views of how people are feeling and the messages that you'd like to send, because so we can be the conduit, if you like, to send the messages to the ministers. Laura, I can see your hand up there.
I'm just going to come back in on one additional pressure that's been faced across Wales on school budgets, and that's something that is not being widely talked about, but is kind of coming to the fore at the moment, and that's around the Teachers' Pay Award. So obviously, you know, we campaigned for a Teachers' Pay Award increase, and although we have successfully had a 1.75% increase, and I use the term pay rise loosely because I don't believe that anything less than an above inflation award is an actual pay rise. We're just trying to keep up with the current levels of inflation. We were assured by Welsh Government that this pay award would be fully funded, and there would be no cost implications or across schools. However, having had the discussion with the WLGA and colleagues from local authorities, that is indeed not the case across Wales. We have some local authorities who have decided to put an additional burden on school budgets and ask for a substantial contribution to that 1.75% pay offer. Now, Welsh Government maintains that they told local authorities to budget for a 1% pay offer for schools, and they would pay any additional costs. Welsh Government, according to them, upheld their end of the bargain and have provided an additional 0.75% to local authorities to cover the 1.75%. And a number of local authorities did in fact budget for 1% and are taking on that financial burden. However, that is not the case across Wales. We know of at least 3 local authorities who have, in my view, sold our members the story that we are doing you the favour, and this is how it was put to members in one local authority: we are doing you a favour by we'll chip in 0.5% and you pay 0.5% and the Welsh Government pay 0.75%, and we've helped you out, when actually those local authorities were told clearly to budget for 1%. Now, it is completely unfair The Welsh Government say that a pay award would be fully funded when that additional burden is being put on schools. It is not for schools to feel guilty, not for school leaders or teachers to feel guilty by asking for that pay award. They are entitled to it and they deserve it, and they deserve much more than that. But it is completely unreasonable that we haven't got, my view, a decent enough connection between local government and the Welsh Government to get their act together to make sure that this burden doesn't land on the doorstep of schools. And although we've got a lot of comments around ALN and of course the additional financial pressures that puts on schools, we have this huge disconnect that we are only now beginning to shine a light on. I'd like to share that with colleagues and anybody who's listening to this recording. We do not have equity across Wales, and we do not have a system that treats schools fairly, and it needs sorting out. It needs rectifying immediately.
Thanks, Laura. Bev, thank you, Bev.
Hello, good evening, everybody. How is everyone? Looking good? Hi there. I'd just like to ask anyone who's listening or gets to see our recording this evening, please can you see that funding schools properly is an investment in the future of our country? That it's really important that we fund the schooling of our children for the future for us all. And I don't seem to see that happening, or I don't get the feeling that Welsh Government seem to see it as an investment. And I find that quite disheartening and really quite upsetting. Please, can you help us when delivering our core businesses? We don't need grants. You know, we need that money in schools. We don't need to be waiting to see how much money we're going to get before we can make decisions on staffing. We need that money right at the beginning. Please stop with the cash bombs. As much as we love the cash bombs coming in, we can't plan. We can't plan when you keep on giving us these big chunks of money and then giving us 2 weeks to spend it all. We really need to have that money right at the beginning. We need a well thought out plan. And please, can you do it over a few years? Again, so that we can plan for the future for our children, so that we can put those strong plans in place to ensure the children under our care reach their full potential. It is so difficult as a school leader when you don't know what budget you're going to get, you don't know what staffing you're going to be able to employ. You've got the ALN bill, as people have said, the new curriculum, all of these pressures in school, and all we want to do is provide the very best and take that duty of care to ensure our children reach their full potential. And that has got to be an investment, a big investment for our country. Thank you, Karina.
Thanks, Bev. Really well put. And yeah, that point we raised as well a little bit earlier on around the enormous number of grants that we get from various places, some small, some large, and lots of them arriving very late in the financial year for us. And one of the reasons that was given for that was that sometimes that money comes from Westminster late and then gets shared out at that point. But we have asked the question as well about who's got an overview around all of these amounts of money that come from the various departments, because there doesn't seem to be an overall picture of how many of these little grants and pots of money come to schools and for what reason. Quite often they come with paperwork and work for us to do in terms of accountability that, you know, to go along with that funding. So we've talked about that as well this afternoon. So yeah, thanks for that. And quite another point that we need to raise as well is that some of these grants are the only things that are keeping schools going. You know, grants like PDG, for many schools, that is what is keeping that school going. And, you know, the schools that don't have that funding in the background, but for many schools, that is the funding that's keeping the staffing at the levels that they've got and their ability to support the children in their school. So what happens if that one goes? Goodness knows. So there's a few really good points coming up on the chat, and we'll make sure that we make a note of all of those points. Just a last call out really for anyone else who wants to make a point. You know, we're here to take all these points, and I think one thing we'll do, is really disappointing that we couldn't get some more ministers to our meeting this evening, but I think what we will try and do is perhaps see if we can perhaps convene a meeting with some of these ministers at a later date. I know that they're meeting in the Senedd this evening, and they've got meetings that have run over later than expected. So we would like to speak directly with ministers on this point before budget is agreed, which I think is on the 20th of December. So we'll try and do that in the next few weeks. But your views are really important. And the other part that's really, really important is that we get as many people as possible and spread as far and wide as we can that letter to our ministers that are representing us. So I'm just going to encourage everyone, and just on that point, we need to beat the numbers of letters that went out to ministers in England, because Wales are better and we need to get more letters to our ministers than they managed to get in England. So I'm just going to put that challenge out there and hope that people will share and encourage people to get that letter signed. It's really easy. Okay, I can't see anyone else with a hand up or anyone else who wants to make a point. Just give it a second just to see if there's anyone else. Oh, I've got anyone else? No. So I think we're going to close up there. Oh, Laura, did you want to make a final point? Sorry.
No, I was just going to read out some of the chat comments, Karina, because I think some of them are really, pertinent points. We've got a couple of colleagues on the call saying that, we really feel the negative impact of COVID and lost learning is being ignored. And what we also don't want is for COVID to be the excuse for all the ills of school funding. This isn't a new issue. This isn't something that's come up as a result of the pandemic. It's being compounded by the pandemic, absolutely. But this has been an issue for a substantial period of time. Successive governments have failed to get under the skin of school funding. We were promised a review, which we haven't yet seen. The idea of consortia was put in place in 2014, I think it was, with the idea that this would go hand in hand with local government reform. We didn't have local government reform, and we ended up with consortia on top of what we already had. We are the most heavily regulated education system that there is. We have governors, we have parents, we have local authorities, we have the consortia, we have Estyn, we have Welsh Government. How many more levels of bureaucracy do we need? We absolutely must have a review of school funding, and that must include a review of all these tiers of government. I'm just going to see if there's any other points that were in the chat that we might want to raise. Bear with me a second. Somebody's made a comment here, a really valid point. If we can't plan due to funding, how do we ensure staff wellbeing? Well, staff wellbeing is another one of our 5 priorities for our campaign agenda. We must ensure that we have adequate funding to support staff. Who knows what lies ahead when it comes to the profession? We know that we've already had members come to us to say, the impact of the pandemic has been huge. Underfunding in schools, I can't do it anymore. I can't take it. I cannot salami slice anymore. My school is cut to the bone. I have no option than to cut staff, and I just cannot do it. That's not why I came into the profession. When we've got a recruitment and retention crisis, as we have had for a significant number of years, we must be doing all that we can to retain the good teachers and school leaders that we have, not antagonising them, making them feel demoralised. Louise summed it up perfectly. They feel vulnerable. As a profession, you should not feel vulnerable. You've got the education of our future generation in your hands. You must feel empowered. You must feel supported. And we will do all that we can to make sure that that message is pushed out. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, I think if we've got no other points here, I think I'll just encourage everybody to make sure they keep in touch with us, with NAHT Cymru. And if you've got anything else you think we should be raising, then just please get in touch and let us know, because we're here to try and push the agenda. We're here for the benefit of children. So we really want to make sure that we get that message out. And we can only do that if we're hearing stories from our members. So it's really, really important that you keep in touch and keep speaking to us. Sorry, one more hand's just gone up. Louise, thank you.
Yeah, just a final point really from our branch in Carmarthenshire. We just wanted to say a huge thank you, because we are constantly updated with messages from Laura and information from Laura to explain what's going on and what's been happening on that particular few days, and how you know, strong that you are at the forefront there for us and fighting for everything that we need. And obviously we as a branch want to pass that on to yourselves, really how thankful we are, and we feel very, very much supported, which unfortunately we don't always feel, and it's something to celebrate, I think. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, Louise. That's really, really good to hear, and it's sometimes something that I'm sure, you know, Laura doesn't hear all the time. So we do appreciate that. So yeah, definitely good to pass that on. And again, I'm going to say a thank you, because I know what awful half term we've all had in schools this last term. It's been the hardest. I know that. I'm in it as well, so yeah, well done to everyone, and let's drag ourselves on until Christmas and just keep going. So thank you very, very much. Thank you all.